guys, in this lesson we're going to be looking at how to calculate contour intervals on a topographic map. So make sure you've got your graphic organizer and let's get started. So just a recap of some of the main features on a topographic map that we're going to be looking at, we've got our contour lines, we've got our contour index lines, which are the thicker lines, and then most importantly what we're going to focus on are the contour intervals. This is the change in elevation from one line to the next. So in this map, if the contour interval is 40 feet, then from one line to the next line, every time the contour or the elevation is going to increase by 40 feet. So how do we actually calculate that contour interval when it's not already given to you? So our first step is going to be to find the difference between two numbers on the map. So in this map, we're going to look at 1,000 and 1,500. So when I find the difference, my difference in elevation from those 2 points is going to be 500. Our second step is going to be to divide by the number of intervals between them. Remember, the intervals are the number of spaces. So in this map, we're looking at 1 space, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has 5 intervals. And so when we take our difference in elevation and divide it by how many intervals we have, that gives us our contour interval of 100. Now, what if the numbers on a map are really far apart? In this map, we've got 200 here and 300 here, but there's a whole lot of lines in between them. So remember that every point along a contour line has the same elevation. So if the index line has an elevation of 300, that means I can follow the line all the way around closer to my other elevation and it will also be 300. So step number 1, I'm going to find the difference in my elevation. In this case, it's going to be 100. Step number 2, I figure out how many intervals I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, I have 5 intervals on this particular map. So my contour interval here is going to be 20. The elevation is going to increase by 20 every contour line. Okay, our next example, we're going to look at how we determine the elevation at one specific point on a topographic map. So in this particular map, we're looking at finding a known elevation as our first step. In this case, it's going to be our shoreline. Our shoreline is going to be 0 feet in elevation. Step number 2, we're going to need to calculate the contour interval. We're lucky on this map, it already gives it to us as 40 feet. So then our last step is just to simply add or subtract the contour interval from the known elevation to the unknown elevation point. So in this case, if we're going all the way up to point A, I would increase my contour interval by 40 every time that I cross a new contour line. So our elevation at point A on this specific map is going to be 120 feet. Now remember in the last lesson, it talked about what these little dash lines mean on some of those contour lines. That means that they are going to decrease in elevation. So if I'm going from point A to point B, instead of adding 40 feet, now I'm going to subtract 40 feet. So the elevation at point B is going to be 80 feet. It's decreasing in that elevation. Okay, our last example we're going to look at is how do you calculate changes in elevation. If it's giving you a question and asking what is the change in elevation from point H to point G, here's our steps. Step number 1, we've got to find our contour interval. Y'all are really good at that by now, so we look at 2 different elevation points, find the difference. In this map it's going to be 50. We count our number of intervals. In this map it's 5, and so 50 divided by 5 gives us a contour interval of 10. Okay, step number 2, we're going to count the number of lines between the 2 points. So if I'm starting at point H and going to point G, I'm going to see how many different lines I'm going to cross. So I have 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, and then by the time we get to this 4th line, I can stop because remember that since point G is at 800 meters in elevation over here, I can follow that line around to the other side and it's still 800 meters in elevation. So I've got 4 lines here. Step number 3, I'm going to multiply the contour interval, which was 10, by the number of lines between the 2 points, which is 4. So we have a change in elevation of 40 meters between point H and point G. All right, now that you have your rundown of how to do all the math related to topographic maps, get your practice sheet and make sure that you check your answers with your teacher or with the answer key.